Hi, thank you, Casey. So welcome, as Casey said, to our March Community Chat event. Thanks for coming today. The Community Chat is a new platform for PACE members and industry pros to get together and talk with other industry experts about relevant topics, hopefully be an opportunity for education as well as networking. So as Casey indicated, we're excited to kind of be back on the Remo platform. You'll notice that you got to select a table, and we're hoping the presentation that I and my esteemed panelists get to present to you today will lead into some good conversation and a little chit-chatting and hopefully some networking at the end of the more formal part of this. So as Casey said, I am the CEO and founder of Stage Consulting Group. We are excited to be sponsoring this event today. We are a global team of call center, customer experience, and technology experts that work within the contact center and customer experience space, serving enterprise organizations, startups, and BPOs. So I have been in and around the PACE Association for many decades, on and off. Excited to serve as the vice chair currently. And really excited to be here with the three people that we're going to be chatting with today. So I'm going to just kind of introduce the three panelists, we're calling them today, and then we're going to dive into some conversation. So I have Rob Marshall with me, who is one of my fellow PACE board members and currently the chair of what we call our Face of PACE Committee, which is really an initiative that started last year with PACE as we took a look at who we are and who we want to be and our role within the industry. And Rob will talk a little bit more about that later. Rob is also a multi-decade contact center veteran like me and currently works at AnswerNet, who is one of our very active members. So I'm excited to be here. I feel like kind of co-hosting this a little bit with Rob today. And we have Fred Shadding on, who is also one of my most favorite people in this space, also a contact center veteran, an industry expert in his own right, and the founder and chief advisor at the Call Center Source today. And last but certainly not least, the one that I am newest to meeting is Jaquanda Nelson. And if any of you got to attend our event, the virtual ACX event this last fall, you may have attended her presentation. It was one of the best attended and best reviewed presentations in the whole virtual event. So we have just been excited to get her more involved and just have her here today talking about a topic that's really important to PACE and the industry and the world today. So diversity, equity, and inclusion in the contact center space is the topic. So the first thing I want to do is I want to ask each of the panelists, and I'm going to start with Jaquanda, ladies first, to just kind of define what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. So we just kind of start with a baseline view of that definition. And I do need to say, because you might see Rob just popped off, we did have a little bit of technology problems in the testing. There's some internet issues. So we're going to keep talking and panelists may come and go, but it's all going to be good. So I'll let Jaquanda answer that first.
Thank you for calling it out. Thank you for letting me go first. So, gosh, what does it mean to me? So I would have to say, when I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think about belonging, right? Because while diversity looks different in different parts of the world and in different, businesses, it's really, the goal is really to create a space where everyone feels like they belong. And that is honoring our differences, respecting our differences, valuing our differences as who we are as people and as our businesses. And looking at how do we include people in processes and how do we include people in spaces. And the equity piece is really around how are we intentional and honest around barriers that exist that prevent people from feeling like they're included and not prevent people from feeling like they belong. So that is my kind of broad way of looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Beautiful. Thank you. Fred, would you like to give your perspective on how we kind of define that and what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I look at it from more of a thesis standpoint. It's certainly about sharing. It's certainly about identifying, but I like to just kind of cut to the chase and be simple about it. Diversity, to me, my data point on diversity is really enabling those who are sometimes deemed in an organization invisible to become visible. When I say that, I talk about how in certain organizations, it's monolithic at certain levels. There's a lot of similarities at this level. There are a lot of similarities at this level. There are a lot of similarities for this type of job, for this type of job. And sometimes in those similarities, there's a certain type of person, whether it be, a certain ethnic background or type. And so you have these clusters. But within that, the company may not value this position over here as much as this position over here or that position over here. So this position might be more invisible. So what DEI really does is help those individuals in those organizations that are sometimes deemed invisible. Contact center is typically one of them. Let's just face it, at the agent level, become visible. And so that's just my layman's view of it as an observer, as someone who's been in this industry for a while.
I think that's great, Fred. Thank you. Rob, if we have you back. So just starting with kind of how are we individually, right, kind of defining diversity and equity and inclusion?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. And again, thank you all for being here. And certainly to my esteemed panelists that are here, and Krista, our incredible moderator. Thank you for hosting this event, having this event. I think now is a critical time, not just in our industry, but in our world. So when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that I thought about in thinking about and preparing for today was, as opposed to getting into all the data surrounding the topic, which we can do and we will do to a degree, I wanted to make sure that we humanized, if you will, this discussion today, because what we're doing is we're talking about people. And so from my standpoint, and understanding the journey that I've been on over 30 plus years in this particular industry, when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, DE&I, or, and we say these things and we tie it all together sometimes. And I think we move really, really quick by it without taking a look at those individual components. So that's why I'm thankful for people like Fred and people like Jaquanda who understand it at its simplest term, diversity, which is it's a mix of things. In this case, we're talking about a mix of people. We're talking about a mix of different people of different cultures, different ethnicities, different genders, all of those kinds of things. That's the diversity that we're talking about. And then when we talk about equity, I think a lot of times when we think about DE&I, we kind of interchangeably use equity and equality. But we have to be conscious that they are two different terms and they mean two different things. So when I think about equity, I'm talking about understanding at the individual level, the starting point of the person. Equality says to me, if I show up at a sporting event with someone else who might be a half a foot shorter than I am, equality says, give each of those guys a crate so that they can see over the fence in front of them. They get one crate. That's equality. Equity takes into account the fact that that other person may need two crates. So now equity raises the bar because it considers where someone starts. Now you might say, why is that relevant in the contact center space? It goes back to what Fred was saying. We have many different kind of people in our contact centers. They're starting from different places. And too often, those who may be starting beneath where someone else may be because of education, because of socioeconomic conditions, whatever it is, we have to figure out what do we need to give that person in order to give them the opportunity to raise up and rise through. So DEI to me is those component parts, everybody realizing what the starting point is, giving them an opportunity, but then make it including them in the discussion, letting them know that their voices are heard, their opinions matter. And again, we're talking about people. So those are the things that I think of.
Rob, I'm going to like head bob my head off during this conversation today, because when you talk, like I get goosebumps. Like your passion behind people, right? In every way just gets me excited. So,
that's right.
So the first thing I want to ask you again, Rob, is, you know, you and I both sit on the PACE board, right? And have been very actively involved in taking a really hard look, even right before COVID, at who we are and how we are positioned in the industry and what we look like and what we do and what matters and what doesn't over the last year. And I know that,
yes,
you know, one of the things that we wanted to kind of start the conversation out with a little bit is like, why is this conversation coming up now, right? Why now and why PACE? And maybe a little background on how we got to here.
Yeah, you talking about me getting excited. Yeah, you're getting me excited asking me that kind of a question, because when we ask the question, why now? Why PACE? How did this conversation come apart? I think we need to digress a little, because the conversation at its root relative to DE&I has been a conversation that is not new. You know, a lot of us listening today, you either went through school or you lived through, you know, 55, 60 years ago, a lot of things associated with the civil rights movement, where you had Dr. Martin Luther King and John Lewis and some other individuals who were marching and doing things all in the interest of those that are marginalized and have been oppressed. In fact, when you look at Dr. Martin Luther King, and when he was assassinated, he was about the work of trying to help the garbage workers and pushing forward for equal rights and better pay and that kind of thing. That was then. You can even go further back into antiquity, into the early centuries of creation, and begin to see that, you know, we had racism and those kinds of things going on back in the Roman Empire and the Greco-Roman world. So from that point in time, and you fast forward to our current time, this discussion has been ongoing. We didn't call it DE&I, it was called something else, but it's not new. The thing that is unique about this time and why now is because in 2020, I believe, this is Rob Marshall believing this, that in 2020, with the onset of a pandemic that put the world on pause, in fact, put it on stop for a while, we couldn't move. You couldn't help but see the things you saw going on television. You couldn't help but see George Floyd. You can't unsee what you saw. So what this did was caused and brought to the forefront this need for allowing people to equality and equity in our society. So it's not new. We have to understand that. But we are not, listen, we couldn't ask for a better time to be alive, because we've got the opportunity to do something and to help people. And this isn't a black and white issue, right? This is about all of those things that I said early on. This is about elevating women. This is about why are women in positions of leadership being paid so much less than a man? Why is that? You know, there's a lot that we need to look at as we go through this paradigm. So I am totally excited. Why PACE? Why not PACE? We're talking about the contact center industry. We claim to be the leaders, the advocates for contact centers. If we don't do it, who will? This is our time.
Uh-oh. I love that man and his passion. All right, he'll be back. I'm sure he'll be back. Fred, my next question is for you. When we were talking about kind of putting this together, you had really made a comment that this conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion is really a first for the industry. And so can you talk about that a little bit and what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's time to really allow our industry to step back and examine, where some of our, challenging gaps have been. And again, I just kind of call it like I see it. I've been very fortunate to have been given some opportunities that I've certainly taken advantage of to kind of grow my career. But in the 20 plus years that I have been in this industry, and I started with Sitel, who is still going, and worked with some other really, really great organizations, in this industry. When I would go to events, when I would go to conferences, when as a, senior VP or EVP, whatever title I had at the time, and I would go to client meetings or sales calls and things like that, or I would walk a call center floor, whether it be in the US or India or the Philippines, they're just, when it came to American professional representation, because I think for the context of this conversation, we're talking about kind of US opportunity, right? When I see American vendor managers or vendor executives or things like that, or contact center executives or client executives, generally when I walked in the room, I was sometimes alone. And that was something that, I observed. But one of the things that you learn, and certainly as a proud graduate of the HBCU, is you never let your diversity become a disability. You walk in there and you represent. And that's exactly how I've always carried myself, because perhaps there may be a perception of folks that might look like me because you've never been around me before. So I have to be the best me, the most articulate, the most thorough, a little bit extra in what I do to ensure that the next person who may have a similar cultural fit as I can be received well. Mm-hmm. When I would go into the call center floor, there's this sea of diversity, this utopia of beautifulness, black, brown, yellow, white, different genders, purple hair, orange hair, awesome. And that's the proof of the pudding. At the end of the day, when we deliver contact center services and we handle the emails and calls, guess who's doing it? They are. Those folks on the floor. And that is your prized weapon. And so one of the things that just often concerned me is when you would talk to these people on the floor. I've been there 10 years. I've been there 15 years. This is a contact center agent who's made it to supervisor, who's made it to manager. And then again, I go to the client meeting and you talk to somebody, oh, I just came over from XYZ company 3 years ago. And they're the call center director, or they're an operations manager. And so I'm looking at this, these are just common sense observations that you make over the years. Yeah. Why aren't these individuals at least given again, I just call it like I see it, folks. This is just the data point that we have in our industry. If it's in dispute, you can certainly, find discourse through PACE, because this is what this conversation is about. It's a tough discussion, uncomfortable discussion to have. There's certain people that are watching this now or will watch it in the future that when they say, let me look at my contact center leadership. Let's look at the lower management. Let's look at the middle management. And let's look at the upper management. What does that look like? Half of my call center is non-white or minority, whatever it might be. All of my leadership maybe not be minority. So these are just really tough questions that I've observed over the last 22 years that I've been in this industry, it's time to open the dialogue and be intentional about it. And I'm glad that an organization that focuses on the advocacy in the contact center, the development and the performance of it through PACE, and hopefully others will join this bandwagon, are going to take this great resources to help companies understand, deploy, and execute strategies. No one's telling you to go hire 50% staff. Let me tell you a secret, guys. Again, just calling it like it is. No one wants to be a diverse hire, even if you're diverse. You want to earn it, and that's what everybody wants. So I said earlier, you want to help the invisible become visible. People just want you to get out the way, let them work, level the playing field, and let them get the rewards that they so just deserve. So we can talk more about gates that people set, things like that. But that's why I say it's time. It's just general observations.
So our observation is the same view we took when we looked at ourselves as an association representing that very diverse industry, right? We didn't look very diverse. And, PACE's goal is to grow and represent the whole of the industry. And so this is exactly the honest conversation we're having as an association, and we hope also is encouraging our members to have, right? So I really appreciate that very honest answer. And I think, Jaquanda, I'm going to come over to you for a minute, because part of your role at Concentrix was to kind of help them tackle these topics as an organization. And that was the topic that you spoke on for us at the ACX virtual event in the fall. That was just super dynamic and awesome. And so I know one of the questions we wanted to start with you is, when you make these observations that we've all made, right? When you look at these truths, where as an individual, as an association, as a company, where do you begin to move in the right direction and make the right kind of change? What would you advise to organizations?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And I have to say, I have been in the industry and with Concentrix for almost 8 months. But I can tell you that this is happening across, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who are either having these conversations, wanting to have these conversations, or too afraid to have these conversations. So I'm glad that we're having it here. I will say at Concentrix, and I love that you asked me the individual piece first, and this is kind of following up to Fred's point around just historically underrepresented minorities feeling like they have to fit in the majority, right? They have to speak a certain way or dress a certain way, or make sure, be very careful about what they're saying and how they're saying that. And for me, I'm also part of a younger generation, so I bring a certain aspect of minority in that space where we do have a little more boldness about us, and I show up as I am authentically, and that's a big deal. Like, it's a revolution for someone being a young Black woman named Jaquanda, with hair that is purple, right? You might see it on the floor, but you're not seeing it as an executive, right? And I don't abbreviate my name. I ask people to pronounce my name correctly. And if not, I'll tell you how to pronounce it, right? Like, I want to be able to show up as myself. And I take pride in that, because there are so many people who tell me, like, I wish I could wear my hair like you and feel confident and not be afraid that I'm limiting my career. So for me, I think just showing up as I am is creating space for the other women, other Black women or other women from different, women in general who have to be mindful of how we dress in all these spaces. I feel like that's how I'm showing up personally. As an organization, we're a global organization, 41 countries, well over 250,000 staff. We are a very diverse organization. And so one of the things, at least when I started, was to really bring us around getting clear on what is diversity and what does it mean, and recognizing that there are different aspects of diversity. Historically, diversity and inclusion, especially from a North America perspective or American perspective, is around more women and people of color, and that's great. So you focus on that, but then when you get to other countries, it is not necessarily about race. It may be around gender. It may be around people with disabilities. It may be around, you don't have a diverse talent pipeline, at least from age differences. And so the goal is to, number one, recognize all the aspects of diversity. And we actually held an event for Global Diversity Awareness Month, expanding the language of diversity. Help people understand. People say it, but they don't oftentimes know what it means. And then get really clear around what are your gaps. So you have to do an assessment, and you have to do a fair assessment. Fred was doing very good assessments by observations. There are no other Black people in this room, right? So sometimes it's starting with the basics. Look at the numbers that you do have. Data can be really challenging, and that is overwhelming for people. You may not have all the data, but start with what you have, and then again, figure out what the gaps are from there. I think another component to that too is, and this is, and I always talk about it from kind of two different perspectives. So it's about representation, and it's about creating a space of belonging, because you can bring diversity to the table, but if you're not listening to their perspectives, if you're not hearing their ideas, if you're not trying to implement any of their ideas, it doesn't matter. So think about your culture. How is your culture actually preparing preparing itself to accept and create space for others who are different, right? And being really honest about that. Because oftentimes we may talk about culture, but if people aren't treating people in that way, it doesn't matter. So I would suggest start there, looking at, well, number one, of course, what data you do have, what are the gaps that you have, and where do you need to grow? If you know you need to grow in a certain region or a certain area or perspective, you don't have that, start by asking yourself, who is missing from this decision-making room that does not represent our agents and our advisor staff? That's a great place to start.
I would believe, just being in and around the contact center industry for more decades than I count now, that just having that awareness and dialogue, well, I would believe would start to shift things, because I think there's unintended bias and processes and things in place that until you even are honest about what you see and about that data, it's just not even in anybody's radar, right? We're moving 800 miles an hour. So super, were you going to add something, Fred?
Yeah, Jaquanda said something that's just really stuck with me. You have to have individuals at a certain level that are willing to receive the information. Like I said, I've been fortunate. I've had an ownership group that was ready to receive anything I was able to give them, and made changes, but they were, of a certain ilk. Some companies, you need people like Jaquanda, which is why these chief diversity, or however you want to position it, officers are created, because you need a strong voice in the room where there is no voice at that moment. And then as her work continues and her work becomes successful, hopefully she won't be needed, at least in that discussion, because there'll be individuals that have, gone through the gauntlet that has been set and have made it into those positions. So, one of the first steps certainly is, as she said, get that feedback, but you gotta be willing to receive it. This is a tough conversation. It's a tough reality check. Some people are going to be super incredulous, and those are the people who right now are looking out in their contact center floor and then looking at their own corner offices and saying, nothing's wrong with this.
Yeah.
Some people just can't talk to you right now. Hey, they're not ready.
Right.
But it's going to pass them. It's going to pass them by, and then maybe their contemporaries are going to see greater, things, and then they'll catch up. So just, I was watching the Blockbuster Netflix had a Blockbuster thing about how Blockbuster, went out of business because Netflix basically kind of came in. They got head faked on the not wanting to do streaming thing. They thought it was not the thing. So this might be that thing that people may pass on to. If you're not ready, keep it moving. Good luck with you, but we think there's some business case opportunities here and have some proven data points that this makes sense. But it's a tough conversation. You got to be ready for it.
Kristen, if I could just add to that, I love the Blockbuster example he gave, and another example could be the business of the taxi cab, right? The taxi cab didn't want to make the adjustment, so now that they're out of business and Uber's got all the work. So they didn't want to make that adjustment. But I think what we have to do in our environment is, as leaders, because this has got to start at the top, right? The top has to understand and be willing to take a look at that organization. But then, it becomes a real need to change the culture. You have to understand the culture and you have to be honest. You have to examine yourself and really be honest about that and work on trying to better or increase what I like to call your cultural intelligence, your CQ, right? You want to understand that. What is the culture so that you can engage in a world that is multicultural? And that takes work. None of what we're talking about today is anything that happens overnight. We didn't get to where we are overnight. We're not going to, get to where we need to be overnight. It's a situation that requires that hard conversation. And there are going to be people who may feel like they want to ask questions, but they don't know how, they don't know what, then they don't want to offend. We have to create these cultures that allow for safe spaces where people can learn from one another. How can my Caucasian friend even envision what it means to be constantly followed by the cop or pulled over all the time or followed around in the store when you go? And I'm a grown man. I don't need, to be followed around the store. I'm not going to steal anything, but people still do that. And until we can have those kind of honest conversations, then, a lot of times you have to deal with these microaggressions that we hear within our world, with these subtle innuendos and words that come from people because they're not taking into consideration the receptor or the receiver of that. And so we've got some work to do, but it's an exciting time, I do believe.
So Rob, what do you think are the biggest challenges for our industry around this topic?
Well, wow, Krista, to answer that question, I really have to humble myself because when you talk about the biggest challenge, I can't tell you what the biggest challenge is, right? Because in order to do that, I would be making an assumption that I know the context or the environment or the culture of all of these organizations that we're talking to and that we're talking about. And I don't, right? So, but what I do know is one of the biggest areas that we need to make sure that is being focused on, and that is the area of awareness, the area of acknowledgement, and then the area of commitment to change. So, we need to do the work to understand what is going on in our centers and in our world and in our industry in order to change. See, we're in a huge industry. You say all the time how big this industry is, right? And you look at the numbers in the U.S. alone, in the United States alone, by fourth quarter of 2020, the U.S. alone, this industry was like $100.1 billion in the U.S. And it's projected that by 2022, we're talking about a $200 billion industry globally. Now, that's tremendous opportunity for a lot of people. But how do we, or the contact center, the BPO, the outsourced provider, how do we play in that? How do we get a bigger piece of the pie? Well, we've got to assess ourselves, and we got to start looking at what do the clients want. You know, clients want to see themselves when they look at a person that they're going to partner with. They need to know bigger government contracts. You know, they want to know if you're women or minority owned. And if you're not, who do you know that is, and who are you working with? And what we find in our world, Fred sees it way more than I do, and that is that phone call comes and says, hey, listen, we got a contract here. It's this big. Do you know any minority-owned businesses? Do you know any Black-owned contact centers? Wow, that's a shame, guys. You know, we need to, they're out there, but we need to make sure that there's awareness. People acknowledge that they need to know who these people are, and they make a commitment to get engaged with them. And that's part of what the four of us on this call are trying to convey, is that, yeah, face-to-face is, that's what we're doing. And we're going to present and have resources available so that people know who those women and minority-owned businesses are. So I don't know what the biggest problem is. It's going to take us a lot of work, but awareness, acknowledgement, and commitment to change are huge.
You know, Krista, I like to attack things, if I could, at like the root. And I think one of the systemic challenges over decades in the contact center is that for some reason, the contact center industry tends to, when it comes to leadership positions in a contact center, want to act like it's a major university. And let me explain what I'm saying. You have to look at some of the firewalls we put in place from agent to director. Generally, the minority population in America is, you know, well documented. It's one of the least educated sectors of our population. Not that they are not that they're not intelligent. I'm talking about the capacity, the economic wherewithal, the lost generations of Latinos, African Americans, Japanese Americans who were unable to go to school decades and decades ago. So that has since brought the systematic situation that we have now of a certain group of individuals that have a lesser education than most. So now let's look at the contact center, right? What are your typical requirements to become an agent in most contact centers? High school diploma, maybe 1 to 3 years of experience. All right, congratulations, you've become an agent. You know, you've worked your way up to supervisor, team lead. You've even gotten yourself to a position of a supervisor. The next level is a manager. Now let's look at the job application for a manager. You've been working your way up. You've gotten all the rewards. You're a top performer, but it says you need at least 2 years of college or a college degree and 3 to 5 years of experience. Firewall number one. So now you have an individual who gets to a certain level that has built chemistry within the contact center amongst their peers and is now unable to leverage an opportunity to take it to the next level because there's a firewall. Certainly, they have diversity recruiters out there that can go and find candidates and stuff like that. But just imagine, when we talk about business case in this, just imagine that individual who's worked at that organization, let's say it was 7 or 8 years it took them to get to that point, and they're given an opportunity to promote. What do you think that trickles down to that team that sees that is someone who is inspired now? Fred was able to do it. Jaquanda was able to do it. I can do it. If I work a company, and now, you know, they're working their way to a director. Now that they see that they've been given that opportunity, maybe now they're more inspired to go to community college or go locally to get that degree to try to, but they're firewalls that are put in place in the contact center. And I wanted to approach it systemically to help those who, again, tough conversations. I want to hear it.
It's a brilliant example. I think that is a brilliant example. And it's why when we are working with clients on this type of stuff, it's or equivalent experience, right? Like there are ways when you run into those and you identify, I love that term firewalls, right? If you really look at the data, like Wanda said, and you see where this is systemically like prohibiting people from moving on, and you take a look at that honestly, there are ways to still be fair and to change that impact very quickly, right? So that, I think that's a really, really great example.
I mean, I joked about it being like a university because for some reason, when you get to a manager level, you know, we need degrees and there's an argument.
I've never really always understood that.
For IT or workforce management, there's a real valid argument there because that's a certain skill. But I think we all can agree the contact center is not rocket science. It's a process-driven organization. So if you can master the process of call flow, of training, of workforce management, you can execute, you know, and you can get education along the way. So I think if we start to look at those systemic firewalls that have been put in place that restrict that class of people that typically kind of look like the three of us on this call, you know, and others, you know, you may see a certain lift in those things. You know, no one is kind of calling anybody out. These are just observations. Go look at your own job description, guys. You know, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I've been watching it for the last decade.
I think it's a really, really great example. So Jaquanda, just being sensitive to time, and I do want to point out to everybody, this was scheduled until 1:45, but we hope that when we're done here in a few minutes, you guys will stick around, go to a table, right? Let's like meet each other, take 5-10 minutes to say hello to one another. You can find these esteemed panelists at a table somewhere and go ask them a question too if you want. But Jaquanda, before we put a wrap on that, first of all, I have to tell you guys, because you brought it up twice, I did purple hair once, and it was recent. And I went to visit a client in New York, and they were not impressed with me. And I was like, I'm from Minnesota. This is Manhattan. I would think this would be cool, right? So I don't even know. Apparently, northern Minnesota is more fashionable. Jaquanda, you can come up here. The question that I wanted to ask you is just, you know, where do we begin the work? I know you started to touch on this a little bit. There's a question up in the box that says, you know, we're a smaller contact center or company. Like, you know, are there just a couple of like tricks that you just kind of, not tricks, tips and tricks for kind of how to start going on this that you would just kind of let us close out with you?
Yeah, so I'll do a personal level and I think organizational, right? So personal level is to understand that this is a continuous journey. It is not, we went to this chat, we understand, we get it. It is like building a muscle. And I kind of use this as an example, and I think it might have been at our last face-to-face meeting, but I have someone on my team, he's a male, so we were so excited to finally get a guy on the team, and his name is Christopher. And most people, when they meet a Christopher, we automatically call them Chris. And so, but he very distinctly wants to be called Christopher. There's a story behind it. And so I find me and my team oftentimes having to, like someone honestly said, like, hey, Christopher, right? Because we have a habit of being like, oh, Chris. But that's the same type of intentionality and work and effort and consistency that we have to put in to do this work, because we're not going to get it right. I get paid to do this work. I am still learning. I do not always get it right. And so we have to understand that it takes consistency, and you have to continue learning. You have to continue being honest about where you are in your journey. And then I think from an organizational perspective, depending on where you are, right? If you are a leader, I am going to encourage you to take the lead on this conversation. You cannot leave it to your staff to fix the issue. Include it in your leadership discussions. Make it a part of your priority as you think about your business and how you approach your business, how you show up for people, how you show up for your clients, and how you want to grow your organization. Bring that conversation in there, and you can start from who's not in the room that needs to be in this room. And I think if you're not a leader, if you're someone, have these conversations. Start with the safe folks, right? Whether that's the staff resource group, someone on your team, start having these conversations around, I've really been wondering, how come we don't have Black people on our team? Or how come we don't have enough women in the room? Or how come we don't have diversity? And start having that conversation with like people. And what you'll find is other people are wondering the same thing. And if you get those folks in the room, it'll bring a level and perspective of diversity to where you can start thinking about solutions and packaging that up and bringing it to leaders like myself and Fred and Rob and Krista. So that's my perspective.
I just think about how it's $100 billion annual global industry, right? What's the impact that we can have as an industry on the planet if we actually got this and did this better together, right? I mean, Gary posted in the comments here, the contact center population, 4.5% in the contact center space in the US workforce. I mean, let's just go make that 4.5% fantastic, right? And lead that way. That's what gets me excited. So I don't see any other questions in the question box. So I think at this point we're open to just kind of open up dialogue and again, encourage everybody to kind of maybe stick around if you have another 10, 11 minutes here till the top of the hour. Casey will put us back out on the floor. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you.
Hopefully it's the first of many. Hopefully it's the first of many. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to everyone. I feel like we had got another hour, but so yeah, we'll go back to the tables. And so please stick around and have some conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.